He mopped the floors in a room where futures were born, and no one knew his name. They laughed at his daughter until she made a dead thing breathe. An old machine spoke again, but what truly roared to life couldn't be wired or welded. It all started with one quiet question. "Are you sure this is junk?" The light buzzed overhead as Roy twisted the key in the wall panel. The sterile blue hum filled the lab before the sun touched the city. He moved without sound, his worn boots whispering against the cold tile. The air smelled like metal and old coffee grounds. He reached for the mop handle, still warm from his grip the day before. "Careful," a voice called out behind him. "And don't smear your mop water on the drone table." Roy didn't turn. He looked at the faint footprints near the doorway, each one stamped in yesterday's dust. Silent, he knelt and wiped them away with the edge of his rag, one by one. The cloth caught something, a scrap of copper wire. Not long, not shiny, just a forgotten curl. He slipped it into his pocket. Outside, the gate buzzed. A girl in a college hoodie stood uncertain, her curls haloed by the morning light. Amara. She bounced slightly, backpack slung too heavy on one shoulder. The guard at the booth frowned, arms crossed. "No ID, no entry. Sorry, miss." Amara hesitated, reaching again into her pockets. Empty. Inside, Roy saw, but he didn't move. Just a small nod to the guard, brief and quiet. The guard frowned deeper, then sighed and buzzed the gate open. "Fine. Go ahead. Next time bring your pass." Amara turned to look back, sensing something. Roy didn't wave. The tour group moved in a cluster, led by a young engineer with the voice of someone used to being heard. He gestured broadly, flashing smiles, laughing too easily. "Here it is," he said with a flourish. "The dragon that never breathed, 10 years in development, and still as silent as a stone. Meet the Phoenix Drive." Amara lingered at the edge. The engine sat behind glass, dull and dormant. Something in its frame made her lean forward. Her lips parted. "It's wrong," she whispered. He put this axis off. It can't cycle." Her father was suddenly beside her, his breath barely stirring the air. "Shh," he murmured. "Not here." In the sub-basement, far from the tour, Roy stood over an old testing rig. Rust clung to its bolts like old regret. He unscrewed the casing with a slow, practiced hand. His fingers moved with the care of someone remembering, not learning. He touched the panel gently, like it might flinch. "You were never broken," he said, low and steady. They just stopped listening. Upstairs, laughter echoed. "Grandpa Roy's diagram," she says. One of the engineers leaned against a stool, smirking. Let me guess. He wants us to spin the rotor backwards with a mop handle?" Amara's cheeks burned. He was part of the team that... "Yeah, and I played lead violin for NASA. Listen, kid, people like your dad don't build engines. They clean around them." She stood frozen, then turned and walked out fast, shoulders stiff. Roy met her outside, where the wind tugged at the flag over the parking lot. She didn't look up. He didn't speak. He opened his hand and offered her the scrap of copper. She stared at it for a long time, then closed her fingers around it like a secret. They sat together in the pickup truck that coughed when it idled. Amara watched the gate, lips pressed tight. "You knew," she said finally. "You knew how it works. You just stood there." Roy adjusted the mirror, though he wasn't looking at it. "Knowing don't matter," he said. "Not if nobody's listening." All they see is someone to move out the way. The engine ticked as it cooled. A dog barked across the street. Roy remembered another time, another office, another face. White shirt, soft hands, eyes that didn't blink. "You're lucky to be included, Roy," the man had said. "You don't need credit. You're part of it. That should be enough." He'd nodded back then, said thank you, then watched his name vanish from the record like it had never existed. In the janitor's closet, a younger custodian wrestled with a cart that wheezed when it turned. Roy knelt, loosened a hinge, twisted the gear coupling just right. "There," he murmured. "Same principle. Every machine tells you how to fix it, if you learn to hear it." He was rising to his feet when he noticed her. Lena, new, intern badge swinging on a lanyard, blonde hair in a tight knot. She'd stopped in the hallway. "You fixed that?" she asked. Roy nodded, slow. She tilted her head. "Where'd you learn to work like that?" He wiped his hands on a rag. "I listen," he said. "Metal don't lie, just whispers quiet." She didn't laugh, didn't smile either, just nodded and kept walking. Back in the lab, the hum returned. Same lights, same cold floor. But something shifted. Not loud, not visible. Just the way Lena glanced back, once. Like maybe she'd heard it too. And in the quiet that followed, Roy stood a little longer than usual before turning off the lights. The folded schematic was waiting when Roy opened the locker behind the boiler. It was slipped between the bleach logs and a worn paperback. No name on the paper, but he recognized the style. Precise, curious. A second page was tucked inside. A note written small. "Can you take a look?" He didn't answer, just stood there a moment, letting the question settle in the air like dust in morning sun. Then, without a word, he reached into his coat pocket, pulled a scrap of brown paper, and began sketching something small. A correction, a coil loop reimagined. He laid it next to the schematic. Nothing else. In the dim silence of the basement workshop, the tools felt heavier. Not in weight, but in memory. Roy ran a hand along the edge of the test bench. His fingertips found the groove he'd etched into the surface a decade ago, back when he was still a name on a list, still allowed to stand near the machine as it breathed its first failed attempts. Now his name lived only in whispers and mop water. He sat down, exhaled slow. "What if they take it again?" he said to the empty room. "Or worse, what if they laugh at her the way they laughed at me?" His voice wasn't angry, just tired, like an engine that still turns but no longer spins. Later that night, the quiet tick of the hallway lights mixed with the creak of his knees as he descended the steps to the workroom below the labs. The air was sharp with oil and forgotten heat. The test module stood there like a tired animal, patient, waiting. He touched the switch. Nothing. Then tried again, this time guiding the copper gently, correcting the angle by instinct. He felt the tension shift, heard the small click of recognition. "She sees it," he murmured, more to himself than to the machine. "Same way your mother did." He saw her again, clearly now. His wife, Joy, sitting cross-legged on the living room floor with Amara in her lap, shaping cardboard tubes into circuits for science class. Her eyes had that light in them, even then. She taught high school physics and laughed in equations. When she got sick, Roy had kept working, mopping, fixing, staying late. She'd smiled through it all, thin and radiant. "You don't need to be loud, Roy," she told him once near the end. "But you don't get to vanish either." Her voice was still inside him, a current that never died. Amara came back the next morning. She didn't ask permission, just walked past the receptionist into the old lab where the prototype was collecting dust. Roy stood at the doorway, said nothing. She bent low, fingers steady, adjusted the axis on the main gear, just like his drawing. Hands trembling. She flipped the switch. The engine didn't roar. It inhaled, a soft whir, a tremble. Then that slow, deep sound, like breath returning after a long sleep. Her eyes lit up. "He's breathing," she whispered. "He's alive." Roy watched, silent. The next hour was noise. Engineers crowding around. Jokes, jabs. "Well, would you look at that?" The old corpse twitched. "A one-off fluke. Let them play. Kids get bored." Roy stood by the door. One of them, sharp suit, silver watch, smiled down at him like an adult humoring a pet. "Nice to see you joining us, Roy," he said. "Big moment for the mop brigade." Roy's jaw moved once like he might say something, but he didn't, just looked at Amara. She wasn't smiling anymore. "This isn't a game," she said. "It's proof." They laughed again. That night, the workbench was shattered, cables torn, notes soaked in cleaning fluid. On the wall, someone had sprayed in red ink. "Cleanup complete." Amara stared at the wreckage, fists clenched. Roy said nothing, just stood behind her, back straight. His hands didn't shake. The next morning, a student assembly filled the college auditorium. Amara stood on stage beside a broken engine coil. She held it like it was sacred. "You don't have clearance," a professor said coldly from the front row. "No," she answered, "but I have eyes and ears, and I see what you won't." A few in the back shifted in their seats. One or two nodded. In the corner of the room, Lena watched. Her jaw was tight. Later, behind the lockers, she and Roy stood alone. "They won't let her near the machine again," Lena said. "Unless we build a new one. Quiet. Off the books." Roy looked at her for a long moment, then nodded once. "I've got scrap. I've got hands." Lena smiled, just barely. "I've got access." They began that night. The old technician from shipping joined them, whistling as he carried tools in a paint can. "Haven't touched a flux rod in years," he said, grinning. "Feels good." They moved like ghosts, 3 shadows in the off hours. Wires, bearings, welds. Roy's knuckles bled twice, but he said nothing, only wrapped them and kept going. The hum returned, this time louder. In the main lab, a week later, the machine stood whole. Students gathered, engineers, staff. The switch flipped. The engine exhaled. Long, steady, clean. No sparks, no protest. Just a perfect rhythm. No one clapped. No one spoke. Only the sound of the machine, alive again. Then, silence. One of the lead engineers closed his laptop. Didn't speak, just walked out. Roy stood by the door, still not smiling. But something in the room had changed, like a weight had shifted or a door had opened. The older professor found Roy by the vending machines, where the humming of cooling fans masked the sound of breath. The man's coat was wrinkled, his tie forgotten halfway down his chest. He stood quietly for a moment, watching Roy drop coins into the slot, press a button, wait for the click and whir of a black coffee can falling. "I've been watching," the professor said softly. "Too long, maybe. Long enough to know when I'm wrong." Roy didn't turn, just cracked the can open. The scent of burned sugar and rusted aluminum filled the air. We'll be updating the documentation, the professor said. Your name should have been there. It will be now. Roy sipped once, let the silence settle. It's not the name, he said finally. It's the weight behind it. In the lab, not everyone was quiet. A younger engineer stood up during the board meeting, voice sharp. He has no license, no papers. He's a janitor. What precedent does this set? Amara was in the corner. She rose slowly, steady. Same precedent that built this place, she said. People who saw what others ignored. My father hears machines. You hear protocol? Murmurs, a shift in the room, and then him. The one who had laughed loudest, mocked deepest. He stepped forward, a box of parts in hand, set it down on the workbench without a word. Looked Roy in the eyes. I didn't hear it, he said. Now I do. Roy studied him a second. No smile, just a small nod. Later, they offered him a position. Technical advisor, private workroom, full salary. He looked around the table at the neat folders, the eager faces. If you think this means I'm done mopping, he said, voice low and plain, then you missed the whole thing. The room fell quiet. In the hallway that once emptied at his steps, heads now turned. Students nodded. A young woman held the door for him, not as a favor, but as reflex. He walked the same path, but now the silence behind him felt like acknowledgement, not erasure. The video of the engine's rebirth hit the net within hours, grainy, shaking hands filming from a distance. A comment thread swelled. The janitor built it? That's not possible. Why does it run smoother than the prototype? Middle school kids watched it in science class. One of them whispered, I want to be like him. In the old neighborhood, Amara stood in a makeshift classroom. Folding chairs, chalkboard with cracked edges, wires coiled like sleeping snakes on the tables. She held up the copper wire. My dad taught me to listen. Not to machines, not really. To what's underneath. The parts that look like nothing. The kids leaned in. You got parts like that too, she said. Everyone does. Learn to hear them. Back at the lab, someone laid a small piece of copper on Roy's old mop cart. No note, just metal, curved and clean. Roy found it, paused, touched it like a prayer. Then he went to the big room again. Same polished floor, same key in the wall. Lights clicked on. He walked through the space slowly. Behind him, the new kids followed. Lena, the old tech, Amara. No speeches, just motion. And finally, when no one was looking, he stepped out into the daylight. The lab behind him gleamed. He reached into his coat, pulled the same scrap of copper he'd found long ago, placed it gently on the stone ledge by the door, then turned and walked away. And somewhere behind, her voice carried like wind. He never raised his voice, but they all fell silent.